Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Sean and Ewan from Level Up and Live. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
And thanks for having us, Eric. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having us, man. Excited to be
Yeah,
here.
absolutely. No, it's good to be on yours. Good to get acquainted on your podcast. If you haven't already, check out the social media and the podcast, and we'll talk about that at the end too, where you can find these gents. But yeah, Level Up and Live. I'm just going to dive right in. I think that there's a lot of relevant, meaningful conversation about optimizing, right? Like life, health, all the things. But, where do you think that society is? Where do we need to go? And when you talk about the notion of leveling up and live, like, what does that strike within each of you?
Go ahead, Ewan.
Man, it's when you ask that question, I'm like, oh, how am I going to answer it? And every time I think about it, it's like, well, what was going on in my life in the past that's brought us to here, and where was that crux, that moment where it just wasn't going the way I wanted to go? I was doing all the things. I was checking all the boxes, I want to make this amount of money. I want to be this healthy. I want things to look this way. And yet when I was getting those things, checking the boxes, I was feeling empty, lost. And I'd always be like, well, what's next? Maybe that wasn't big enough. So I'm looking for the next dopamine hit. So I'll create a new goal. And we just realized that is existing. Even though life looks great and you're achieving and being the person you want to be, people think on the outside too, oh man, I want that as well. Meanwhile, completely feeling like, well, what's next? Why'd I have to keep going? So for me, it was like I was existing and not living. So really, when me and Sean discussed the name of what this would be, this mission, this movement, we're like, man, let's stop existing and start living your life, which is being present. And not just when people hear level up, just business, right? Like that's, most people think more money, leveling up so I can go have and do more.
Yeah.
And it's not about that. It's about all areas of life. How's your relationships, right? How do you treat your wife? How do you speak to your kids? What's your connection with your parents? What are you doing in those areas? What is your pantry filled with, right? Like, what are your goals for business as well? All areas of life. So level up and live in all areas of life. That's kind of where that's where it stemmed from.
Yeah. Sean, you want to add on to anything?
Yeah, perfectly executed, man. Mic drop on that. So you can tell we've talked behind the scenes because I would probably spit out the same thing that he just said.
Perfect.
But my spin to it would be, I'm 37 and, I've always went to school. My parents, hard workers, and went to school, told me to go to college. So I went to college, played baseball in college, and then told me, hey, I got to get a job afterwards. And then, so I got a job. And then, so basically I just kept doing what society told me to do. I just
follow the script, right?
Exactly. Follow the script, get a house, get a mortgage, go to job, get a 401k, and do these things with society. And what you don't know is what you don't know, right? And so that's what I went along with. Well, I got to a certain degree where I was like, man, I feel like I'm on the hamster wheel. And so I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It was my first book. I hated reading as a kid, in school. I was a CD student. I barely passed. I had to build relationships with the teachers and be nice to them. And so I could get through school, get through college.
That's the real skill. That's the real
I'm telling you, man, it is. The relationships, right?
Yeah.
My wife's a teacher, and just a quick, she's a teacher. And she tells me all the time, she's like, the ones that build the relationships are the ones she tries to help because they lean in, So I got through college, got my first job. That's where I met Ewan in college 13 years ago. And we just hit it off, right? And so he was a mentor to me, early stages. And so we went through life and we were, going through the ups and the downs and the trials and the errors. And we were basically just existing, right? And so it wasn't up until about a couple of years ago for me. Me and Ewan had lost touch for a couple of years. But you know how it is when you have a best friend, right? You can always call them up and then speak that one time and just rekindle, from from past experiences and just catch back up really quickly. And for me, I hit that place in my life where I was like, man, I was stuck, I was lost, I was unfulfilled. And because I was just in that hamster wheel, just existing. And so that's when my journey started. I hired a life coach, and then he was able to help shed a light and on what thing, my ego, pride, and stuff like that. Because that was driving me, Eric. Is my ego and my pride. And I was just blindfolded to everything else around me, right? I was neglecting all areas of life. All I was focused on is what society was telling me: hustle, grind, get money in the bank, do this, this, and this. And, I was a follower. I was a sheep. I was saying, okay, let me do that, right? But then I picked my head up at 30, in my 30s, right around 33, and I was like, there has got to be more than life than this, right? And so I'd never heard about level up. I'd never heard about living, life to your fullest and core values and all this development, right? Because I was just so blindfolded. And when I hired that life coach, and then I went down the rabbit hole, and I started doing research. I started getting curious. That's the number one thing, is get curious.
That's
right?
Such a good phrase. Yeah.
Such a good phrase. When you listen to podcasts like this, and when you listen to guys like you, just get curious. Right? When you hear something, instead of like blocking and having that scarcity mindset, have the abundance mindset. Like, let me get curious about what he just said, versus, I'm going to have the wall up. I'm going to have my ego. Nope, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But just get curious and be, genuinely, and then do your own research and see how it applies in your life. And that's what I did. And so then I started, and I said, okay, started the, podcast, coaching, and all these other things. And my mantra was like, level up, right? How do I level up these different areas of life? And that's kind of how it's morphed into level up and live your life to its fullest. And it's just a constant, it's our North Star. It's our journey. And it's the journey of becoming the optimal version of ourselves in these different areas of life. How do we get so good? And who do we need to become being, right, in these environments, in these different areas of life, to really help impact and serve the people around us? And to me, that is what level up and live. It's a journey. It's a North Star. It's a vision. It's a macro picture of things. So great question. I love it.
Yeah, that's so huge. And I'm going to rewind back and hit on a couple points because you both encapsulated so many things. And I have a huge appreciation for the grind, as you put it, right? But like, I think you introduced this notion appropriately, where you got to have a North Star, and that is purpose. Like, why the grind? Like, if you have a grind and it's to make money and to serve your family, or to serve your ambitions and your goals and your dreams and your travel, and like what feeds you, what feeds your soul, like, fantastic. And if your grind is a purposeful job where you're serving others and what have you, right? Like, everyone has to self-define that. But I love that discussion, because we don't want to just grind to grind, right? To exist, as you said. And that resonates with me, what you gents both put out, and that I was instilled a hard work ethic as a young man, and I found police work following my own volition. But even then, there were a ton of other aspects in my life where I was just kind of following like what convention was. Like, yeah, I guess I'm gonna go do this, socializing out with my friends, and kind of this like unhealthy lifestyle, like staying up and drinking and going out. But I knew it didn't fulfill me. Like, it wasn't. Like, I liked hanging out with my buddies, and we do a lot of other awesome things now because we've all kind of grown out of that. Fortunately, I think the most of us have. But yeah, just that notion of like, for what purpose? And another piece I want to hit on is like the coaching aspect. I think anyone that's listening in probably is fortunate and grateful to have certain mentors or coaches, teachers, like figures in their life. But the twist for me is like, now that I'm dabbling in coaching, coaching others, there's such an objectiveness to it that you can offer when you're not the boss, when you're not the friend, when you're not fill in the blank, because there's so many, again, these conventions, these like tiptoeings around feelings and relationships, where like you can give the honest, compassionate, kind truth because you know exactly where they're coming from and they came to you. Yeah. Whereas like, I was talking about it with a gentleman who's coming on. He's like, hey man, I know you're busy. Or he didn't say hey man, he said hey sir. But he's a young cop, and he's like, I know you're super busy. You have all your other responsibilities. I was like, no, but this actually feeds me. So like, I'm excited for your questions. I'm excited because you're coming to me. Whereas I have employees that I'm supervising, but they may not want to hear half or any of the things I want to talk about, right? So you got to come, it's a two-way street. You got to meet them halfway. And before I keep rambling, I have to hit on like that relationship piece. That's so huge. Like when you're talking about just living amongst people in society, I mean, EQ like popped into my mind when you're talking about that. And I think as much as a lot of these topics can be sensitive, we say nutrition is a dogma or fitness is a dogma, or like that's really personal, people's weight, people's health status. Finances are really uncomfortable to talk about, but honestly, like relationships are super, super uncomfortable to talk about. Sometimes with the people that you're in the relationship with, it's so uncomfortable, right? So I love how you hit all that in such a quick span. And yeah, it's just, we're going to have to dive in and keep going for the listeners.
One of the things when we get our feet wet with something in life, right? And whatever that may be in the different areas of life, to get outside of that existing in that hamster wheel and whatever it may be, right? It's, to me, it's like what your friend said that was coming on the show is like, hey, you're busy and you have priorities and you have responsibilities. And so one of the things that hits really hard with me is that there is the person that does it because they're actually just doing it, and because everybody else is starting a podcast, everybody else is going and getting up and going to work and doing the same old dance, same old song, right? And then there's the guy that's actually living the life that they want to live, right? Which is what you're doing. You're doing the podcast. You're taking the time, energy, and effort out of your day to be here with us today, to invite us on and to impact and serve. And clearly, to me, that shows that is aligned with your beliefs, your values, right? Which in the long run is sustainable. And I think a lot of times we like to jump. We're like squirrel, we like to jump to these different things. And then when we don't jump and we don't go to these different things, what do? We suppress our emotions, we suppress our feelings, and we don't look outside what we're familiar with. We go to work, we get home, we kiss our wife, we sit on the couch, we eat Cheetos, we eat chips, we watch Netflix, and then we repeat every single day, and then we want the weekend, right? And so if you're living that life, like for me, and that was me for 35 years, put on repeat, I'm like, man, there's something different out there, and I'm sure if somebody's listening to this podcast, they know about grit, they know about wellness. And to me, like if you have those things, I've always said this, like I'll take grit over talent any day of the week. And if you can take that grit into aligning it with what you believe and your values, dude, you become an unstoppable force. You can do anything you put your mind to.
Absolutely. And there's probably not a lot of people listening to my show or your guys' show that's like fully like, full veg mode, just like life's passing them by. But we all have our ebbs and flows. We all have our, like, I'll say depressed states. Like I was talking to a buddy and he's just like, man, like things are good in my life, but I'm just feeling low. And I'm like, that's okay. Right. And again, like, in talking to him, I think we recognize that we can be in these ruts, and, maybe it is because we had that dopamine hit of a career goal or a level that we hit, and then what, right? So it became more of a discussion of exploration of like his other drivers and like what, like his North Star, to use your vocabulary. And so I think that we can all recognize that there's times when we're just kind of letting life pass us by. It's not to say we need to be like turned on like full blast all the time. Like there's natural waves, but yeah, like we don't want to just be pacified. All the things that you're saying, it makes me think of like literally a pacifier. Like, okay, give like the Cheetos, be content. Here's a Netflix binge. Don't get me wrong, I love watching a show with my wife, but like to what extent? Like, are we not doing other things? Are we not having the conversations? Like, are we not fulfilling each other's needs? And so, yeah, without continuing to ramble, what brought you guys to this point in connecting in creating the project in this way? When you both found yourselves in this like-minded state.
And Sean asked, was it 6 of us, 5 of us? It was probably a year and a half ago. Sean called me up and was like, hey, I'm starting a mastermind group. Let's get together and just discuss what it is that we love to talk about. Like, this is when we get around together, we just talk about this stuff randomly. We're like, let's do that with some other guy. So there ended up being 6 of us. We met every Friday morning early, and we would talk for an hour and a half, and we'd have agendas and just really work on honing in on the discussions that elevated us, that lifted us up. And this was at the point where Sean had already seen a a coach, and he had such just a revolutionary experience. Like he just turned on a dime and wanted to go down that path. The passion was there, and so he was using the mastermind group he was leveraging it when we have hot seats. I'm doing quotation marks, right? And it was his turn to be in the hot seat. Every 6 weeks, we'd rotate, and whatever guy was up would be able to share whatever it was that was really important to them. Problem they were working on, something that they wanted to work on in their lives, and we would do it together as a mastermind group. And Sean started this podcast. He started coaching, and he's like, "I'm going to do a podcast, guys. I need your all's help." And so we would all pitch in, like, "Hey, what about this? What about that?" Sean would go away, put it together. And it was probably, maybe 3-4 months in, me and Sean just continually kept talking about it. Just like, I just loved the idea of what he was doing. And as best friends, I just giving any advice I could give, and he would take it and it would work. And so you could probably jump in here. Sean goes, "What was your thought process?" Because he eventually, I'll jump to, he's like, "Hey, let's do this together because we're already doing it." And I was like, it just felt right. Like, no, I've been liking to take my time to make decisions on, do I really want to do this? I'm not just saying yes because that squirrel that Sean just mentioned. I was like, do I really want it? And so I take time. And this one was a very quick decision. I didn't need to think about it long. I knew this was what I wanted to do together. And since then, now we have other mastermind groups. We've gone virtual. We have paid mastermind group. We have it's all business owners, entrepreneurs in there, and their lives are changing the same ways that our lives have been leveling up too. But yeah, Sean, maybe you could jump in there and fill in the blanks.
Yeah, man. So I love everything that you're saying. And so Ewan hit the nail right on the head. So for me, it was like the same thing. It's like, called these guys up 15 months ago. And I said, hey, and when I reflect back, Eric, it was because my number one reason is because I was lonely. I was like, grit. When I hear the word grit, like, I know grit. Like, I mean, I've done like Spartan races. I've done ultras, marathons. Like, you got to have grit, right? Yeah. And so I know the definition of that. And so I always did that. I've done that for the last 10 years. And so I was lonely, man. Success is a lonely road, right? And I get that. But I never understood like solitude. I never understood like, if I was by myself, Eric, I was not okay. I was uncomfortable. Like, I always had to surround myself with somebody, a customer, a team member, a best friend, my family, whatever it may be. Yeah. And so I was so alone for this period of time, building my first business in 2015. And I picked my head up in 8 years and go, holy cow, I am a lone wolf and this is miserable. And so that's why I'm like, Think and Grow Rich. I don't know if you read that book, but in that book, he talks about creating a mastermind group. And I'm like, I've done all these things, right? Because I've read books and I'm a big believer in following following their footsteps and where I want to become and who I want to become. And so I started a mastermind group. I said, and I'm an action taker. I'm an 8 on the Enneagram. So I just make things happen. I'm an activator. That's my number one thing.
Yeah.
It's a double-edged sword.
I feel it. I'm into the Enneagrams. I feel the 8. Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew it, Eric. Like, I've studied to be an Enneagram coach. And so you're not supposed to guess people's numbers because you can always miss what the core motivation is. But I was like, I think Eric might be an 8.
Oh, it's not me. No, I'm not. No,
you know, what are you?
Not. No, I'm a 1. Yeah. So it's
a lot of 8s tricky. That I've met are and 1s are married. 8s and 1s get on very, which is interesting.
My wife's a 9. So
all right, close to it.
Kind of I'm the 1 wing 9, I think. She's way more into it than I am, but I do buy in. It makes so much sense for those listening to what. And yeah, just look it up. Enneagram, ENNEAGRAM. Yeah, you could do a quiz, but it's so informative for me. It really helps me understand a lot of my motivators, like where that's coming from. Yeah. But anyway, please keep going. Sorry.
Total side note, we could have a whole other podcast episode.
Oh yeah, we probably should. Let's just do it. Yeah.
Love that. So so fast forward, and just creating this mastermind group and then bringing these guys together. And I didn't have a clue what it was going to look like. And I just had the belief, right? I just had manifested it, visualized in my head, like I wanted to surround myself with other like-minded guys. And fast forward 12 months later, we met every week for 52 weeks, these same 5 guys. And, we had this proof of concept. We did the research, hot seats, facilitator, and it just worked like clockwork, right? And reflecting back, it was a lot of therapy. It was a lot of like leaning in and learning about the Enneagrams, disc profiles, and these different assessments, even like we did love languages, like we did everything.
Yeah.
And what we found is by doing all this and by collaborating and coming together, we created a safe place. We created a safe haven, right? And so I'd never had this before, Eric. I'd never had been able to express my emotions, right?
None of the guys had.
None of the guys had.
To that degree. None of us had.
None of us had. And then
I can see that.
As a leader, right? And as an 8, like if I'm vulnerable and other people see that I'm being vulnerable and sharing my struggles, well, what do they tend to do? They're going to drop their ego, their pride, and they're going to share and they're going to get vulnerable. So it just created this special environment. And we're like, well, we're only doing this with 6 people. Why are we not trying to expand this and monetize this? And so I'm sitting here like, just leveraging the group, right? And come in the hot seat. And then it's funny because the guys around me, they're like, you could tell a lot of them wanting to leaning in, like, I kind of want to be a part of this, but they were watching from a distance, Eric. They were like, well, Sean, we'll let you do your thing. But then the guy over here that you're seeing, he's the one that bought in. He's the one that spent the time, energy, and effort. He's the one that tried to solicit ideas behind the scenes. He's the one that came over every Tuesday, helped with the podcast. We don't get paid for it. And he just kept showing up, right? And now we're building this thing together because our beliefs, our values are aligned in unison of serving, impacting, and being that servant leader. And it just works that he's my best friend. And so it's just created this beautiful, this unison.
Dude, I love that. And it's that notion, like, I love the phrase iron sharpens iron. And I didn't realize it's biblical. I think Proverbs, I think I just saw that. But yeah, like you really have to surround yourself with the influences that you want to allow you to be influenced by. Like you're the average of your 5 closest folks or your 5 closest friends. And so you start thinking about that and you're like, okay, where do I land in that, right? Like, are people challenging me? And then are they challenging me in all these facets? I think what I love about that notion, like building this mastermind group or this intentional group, is not just your buddies where you're just catching up and you're like, hey, how's this, how's that? And it's just
big
passive,
distinction.
right? Like one thing that you said that I love is, and I'm trying to introduce in my own circles, is like intent. Like, what are we here to talk about? And so you can cobble these things together. Oftentimes, if you're in a traditional work setting, you have the people that work the type of way with the type of pace and the type of goals you do, right? They might challenge you, your boss might challenge you. But then what about relationships? What about fitness, right? You got to go to the gym, you got to go to this club to challenge yourself in fitness, but then it's going to be like is around like, right? And so how are you going to actually have people elevate the way you want to live? And truly, things are a lifestyle. Like, we all have our own individual culture and subcultures, but like when you go into this group and everyone signs up, and they sign up in these big ways, not just to say, yeah, I'm here to learn, but as you've illustrated so well, like this willingness to be vulnerable. And the next part of vulnerability that I love that you already hit on is it's a team. Like, you're not out here by yourself. Like, here's like, I'm bearing my soul. I'm sharing my goals and my struggles, and like, okay, now I'm better for it because I own it. No, like, you have all these others around you to rally and say, hey, what about this? What about that? What about this? And rather than like your friend, that we've all been in those situations where your friend's venting or your significant other's venting. This might be the more relatable one, right? Where you offer things. Well, sometimes they're not ready for you to offer that. Like, they just wanted to vent. And I've had friends say, hey man, like, I appreciate it, but I'm just trying to vent. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I guess we'll have this conversation in 2 years again, when it goes back to this point.
They need to get it out. And it lines in the mastermind group. We're once you've been in the group for a while, you understand what's coming. But one thing is fascinating, and this is to me, it's the key, and it's just the indicator. Every week, we would ask, what's a high, what's a low, and what are you grateful for? And this is where it gets fascinating. These are high-level entrepreneurs. Many of them making multi-7-figure businesses, right? They got multiple employees, and we'd ask them, what's your high for the week? And they'd be like, oh, my high was, well, let me think. And they would have to think. They couldn't tell you right off what the high was. Then they'd be like, well, no, that's not it. So they couldn't tell you right away what was going on that was good in their life. Why are we not able to just say that right away? Where's the highs? Why are we not aware of that? And then the lows, normally those would come out real fast. It was shocking. Like, they could tell you what was going on with the lows, but they were never thinking about the highs. And then the gratitude, once again, the eyes would go down, meaning they're thinking.
You gotta chew on it.
So they're not aware. It's not in the front of their mind. So these are like locked away. By bringing that present in the group, we'd be forced to think, forced to bring it out. And you'd see the smiles, the relief, the joy coming out. And if you're getting that dose every single week, it's just a great feeling, great. And it really starts all kinds of conversations. And another point to iron sharpens iron. So this is the first mastermind group that Sean started, and I had never run 3 miles before in my life. Now I played soccer, rugby. I grew up in Scotland. I'd done a lot of CrossFit, but you don't do much more than 3 miles.
You do like over the course of like, a game or what.
That's
match,
right.
Yeah.
But I never just run. I hated the thought of running. But Sean and one of the other guys, they said, hey, we're going to run on Saturday mornings at a track. And they've been doing it for a few weeks. And so I'm an athlete, right? I don't like to run long distance, but I'm an athlete. And so I hear them doing that, and I'm not really into running. So I let them do that. And it was about the 4th week. I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to surprise them. It'll be funny. I'm going to go run with them. It's going to be disaster. Nice. I'll go run. But look at the nature there. What got that stirred up? They were open to space, right? They had created that space for me to walk into to go run. Mm-hmm. And so I run, I enjoy it, right? And so I go back the next week and the next week. And before you know it, a 4th member of the mastermind group was running, and then the 5th, and then the 6th. So now we're all runners, right? And then about 2 months in of me doing this, I just harebrained idea. I'm going to run a marathon. I signed up for the Austin Marathon, and lo and behold, one of the other guys says, well, I'm going to run it too. Sean says, I'm going to run it too. And so there's a bunch of us. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go sub 4. I want to go sub 4 hours on this marathon.
Okay, now you're getting
stupid. I barely ran a mile in August of 2023. And by February of 2024, this year, we had trained, we dialed in the mastermind group. We discussed it. What's the game plan? Like, we honed in the skills. Mm-hmm. Like, we became real runners. We're talking 10, 12 miles a day, right? A day, 5 times a week, like speed work, all the things. All the guys are doing this. And man, I hit my goal, sub 4. Yeah. Sean hits his goal, 3 hours, 35 minutes. Yeah. It was amazing that happened, right? And that would never have happened if we had not all been hanging around each other.
Yeah, would you have done that on your own volition? You already said no. Like, you're barely, like, you wouldn't even say that you like running or you go on a run.
Yes.
But man, like the identity piece of that, and we started with mindset and just identity and just framing, right? I love the notion of the word just framing and having people think on it. But like, here you are saying we're all runners, right? And you were like, I didn't run before. And all that takes is anyone listening right now that wants to be like, man, I'd like to be a runner. Cool. Now you are. Put on your shoes, buddy. Let's go. Like, get outside. Like, everyone has a street outside. Like, if you make it 5-6 minutes, you got to walk. That's okay. You're still a runner. You got out and ran, right? Like, make the choice. Like, so many people labeled me as like a health freak or whatever, a hard worker. Cool. That could be you too. I mean, if you want, if you want to be like a moderate, like part-time health freak, that's cool too. Like, I respect that, right? Like, but just decide, like, make the intent. But I love that, man. I just want to roll right in, guys, to routines. Like, we can all have these goals, and someone listening might be like, yeah, I'm decently active. I'd love to run a marathon. Okay, cool. But for me, so much of it is into the day-to-day, the routines, the habits, right? So make sure that you're successful in your day. You had a successful day, you had a successful week and month, and so on. Sean, maybe we start with you, but like, what are some of your non-negotiable routines, and maybe it's for the day, maybe it's for the week?
Yeah, man, great question. So 2 things came to mind. So I don't know if you're listening. This gentleman that I'm about to give impacted my life in so many ways, and then I've paid it forward and impacted and shared it with my team members and in my family members. James Clear.
Oh yeah.
If you're listening to this, James Clear is the expert on habits.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you struggle with
habit stacking all the time. Yeah.
Habit stacking, brother. I mean, that's, and I've played this out for several years now, and just created this non-negotiables, drawn my boundaries with the habits that allows me to show up my optimal version or best chance of success when I don't feel good, when I'm tired, lonely. And these things do happen because I'm imperfect action taker, right? But to answer your question, as far as the non-negotiables, man, I read a book about 10 years ago by Hal Elrod, Miracle Morning.
Okay, yeah.
And he has this acronym. It's called SAVERS. So it's scribing, affirmations, visualization, exercise, and reading, right? It's pretty basic stuff as far as, if you're listening to this, I'm sure you probably do some of these things. But I immediately, once I started implementing, at first I started, 5 or 10 minutes. just getting the feel for it, wanting to be intentional. Remember, the reason it was sustainable is because who did I want to become? Who did I need to become, to be that leader for my team members, right? So that's what allowed me. I tied that emotional, compelling nature behind it. So it allowed me to keep doing it every single day. And on top of that, if I enjoyed it, I stuck with it. But if I didn't enjoy it, then I found myself not doing it. Like for me, Eric, I never liked writing. I never liked journaling or scribing, right? And it's taken me several years to find out why I haven't liked it. And here's the number one reason that I've reflected on is because I am a horrible handwriter. I do not like seeing my me writing out. It's chicken scratch. It's awful. I can't even read my own handwriting. But it's not allowed me to put that habit in place. So going back to the non-negotiables, every morning, Monday through Sunday, 4 a.m., I'm waking up. My Whoop goes off. I get an electric, and now it's habit, right? I wake up at 4. If you do something over and over and over again, you start, it's habitual. So 4, and from 4 to 4:30, I'm brushing my teeth. I'm going to the bathroom, and I'm splashing water in my face and drinking a cup of coffee. And then kissing my wife. We're both at 4. She goes to work out. I go work out. That's where I start my miracle morning from 4:30 to 8 o'clock. Phone's on, do not disturb. If the house is burning down, something could be my customers, employees. You're not getting a hold of me. You could be the president of the United States. You're not getting a hold of me because what that's saying is
you're not up at 4 in the morning. Let's be real.
It could be 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
This is a non-negotiable, right? Yeah. And so the point of the non-negotiable is this is what's going to allow me to tackle the day. So at 8:01 a.m. when I go live on my phone, I'm able to show up and put out fires and deal with problems, issues, whatever it may be, and show up on these podcasts, provide the energy, right? Be authentic, allow myself to come alive. If I don't do that, if I don't have these non-negotiables, Eric, then I maybe justify an excuse like, you know what, I'm not going to be on Eric's podcast today because I've got other priorities. Or you know what, I'm not going to give my wife a kiss today or give her flowers or tell her I love you, right? Because I don't feel like it. See, that's what happens is when we don't set those non-negotiables. And for me, from 4 to 8 a.m., having that non-negotiable, maybe if you're listening to this, maybe it's 4 to 6 or 4 to 5. Maybe it's 4 to 4:30, or maybe it's 6 to 6:30. But you've got to have that non-negotiable in there so you can show up for the day. Because I'm a big believer in your mornings are is a big determining how the day's going to play out.
Yeah, 100%. Ewan, how about you, man? For me,
man, I in the past have not been good at habits in the sense of things that I don't want to do. I just don't want to do, but that's not, you can't just sit on that. That doesn't work. Okay. You just don't want to do them. Well, that's not going to get you to where you want to go. And so for me, I've discovered there's a few key hacks that I would say, like if I have a purpose behind things and I've committed to it, like one of my main values is honor. I didn't know that until recently. I did a values deal. It was, I forget the name of the book, but it was really cool. And honestly, anything I do ends up leading to this. Any kind of values. Sean actually just sent another one and very similar. But if I'm not within honor and integrity of what I said I would do, I can feel it in my soul. Like I'm not the optimal version of myself, and I just can't sit with it. So it works for me to just do the thing that I don't want to do versus that feeling of that I do not want to go to that place because it's not worth it. So I'll typically, if there's something I want to achieve, I'll have a purpose behind it and I'll commit. And I'm not big on, I don't need to commit publicly a lot. If I've committed to myself because of honor, that's the only thing that matters. I'm the only one that's important to. So I know for me, like when it comes to food, exercise. So, for exercise, for example, putting a purpose behind it. Well, where are we going with this? Like, so the marathon, we got a program and I followed it. So I'm up at 4:30 in the morning. It's when the alarm goes off. I'm out of the bed by 5 and I'm running by 5:30 and I'm going to run for an hour, 90 minutes. And so I was able to do that religiously over and over again. And now, well, we didn't mention this yet, but do you know what HYROX is?
I know roughly what it is from seeing it on your social media, and it looks crazy, and I don't know how I haven't heard it before, but yeah, please explain this fitness event. Yeah,
it's getting really big. And so 2 weeks before the marathon comes, Sean says, hey, after the marathon, you want to do the HYROX competition in Houston together? and I know what this entails. This it is bananas. It's crazy how much what you have to do. It's basically you have to run 1,000 meters 8 times, and in between each 1,000 meters, you got to do a workout session, station. And so I know it's going to be 60 to 70 minutes of grinding. So Sean asked me to do it, and I'm like, you know what? Okay, let's do it. So I just said it. So as soon as I said it, I committed. No, I can't back out. The integrity, the honor. And so to perform well, we need to follow what's the habits? Like, what do we need to do? How are we going to succeed? And so we forward planned and backwards planned that out. Forward thinking, backwards planning. And so we did that, and that created all the habits for us, right? We had a game plan. We knew what we needed to follow, and there was a goal involved. And we've honed in very much not to just focus on goals, like the end, the outcome. Like, we enjoyed the process along the way. That's one of the most important things. And so that led to us doing a really good time there in Houston. And I'll just throw it in there. But Sean texted me a week on Friday, and he said, "Hey, I just got this message, and it says we've qualified for the World Championships."
Yeah, look at that! Your first event. Where is that?
Yeah, it's in France. So so we're going to France in June to compete in the HYROX deal. But all that to say, well, what got us there? What was the habits? Yeah. What habits did we entail? What game plan did we put together? What was the purpose? Was there joy involved? Side note, Sean asked, "Hey, we're going to the World Championships," and to go back to what I was saying earlier, I needed to take time, just a little bit of time, to think, is this what I wanted to do? I didn't sign up for this.
Sure.
And you'd think obligation-wise, well, you're supposed to go, right? But I want to make sure I was going to enjoy it. I want to have joy doing this whole thing, because it would just be another thing to check off the box, another accomplishment that might have been misery for me. And so I really analyzed it, looked at it, and I said to myself, you know what, this is something I want to do. And so I said, hey, let's go to France, man. Let's do it. So our wives are coming, and going to World Championships. Nice. So, but the habits got us there, and that's true in anything, right? We're talking about fitness here, but that could be in your business, and more important than anything, relationship with your wife, kids, anyone that's important to you. Man, really kind of, if it's not going the way you want it to go, you got to get habits together, build that muscle.
Yeah. There's 2 things I want to hit on what you just said, and one is that like you find this success, like this clear success. You're invited to Worlds, like awesome, and like so many people. This is just another example that this happens oftentimes in school, in work, where like, hey, great job. We need you to be a manager, want you to be a manager. And they're like, I kind of wanted to go back to school, or I want to do this other thing. This is only supposed to be temporary. And then they get stuck in that hamster wheel, right? Like that wheel moves faster, and then the cheese is bigger, or whatever allegory you want to add. But so many people get sucked into that. They feel this obligation. But I love how you took the pause and you're like, hey, is this what I want? It is. Awesome. Let's go. Right. And it's totally okay if someone's just like, hey, like, I was kind of a one and done, and I have these other goals, and that would detract from the momentum I'm trying to put into my other aspects of my life. And again, I love how you focused it back to what's most important for you. And for so many people, you can ask them, and this is so true for cops, first responders, where yes, it's a career of service, and yes, there's your buddies at work, and there's these meaningful calls, and ultimately the job bleeds into too much of our lives. It's a very common theme we all know, and luckily we're talking more about it. But this is not just first responders. This is everybody. Like, work becomes too much a thing. But you ask everybody, like, what's most important? Why are you doing all of this? They're like, well, my family. Like 99 times out of 100, right? It's like my family. But a lot of us hard chargers that are into these types of conversations, we up our ante with work. We get up, we do our 2-a-days, whatever. But man, like, what are we leaving for our families? We're distracted by the Outlook and the Slack and our work phones and all these things. So just like we have to take pause and ask, is this serving us, and is it serving our intent, what we're actually truly trying to do?
Yeah, Eric, why would you say that? Why do we get wrapped up in that? Because we almost kind of want to know, but it's like subconsciously we don't want to look at it. Like, what would you say?
It's so true. Anything? We don't want to look at it, right? It's uncomfortable. Like it takes us to that place of vulnerability, and I think it's so much of these are hard conversations to have. Like I love my wife, and we talk about these things. I'm fortunate we do talk about these things, but not all the time. I mean, we go through our times where we're on autopilot. Work is work. We're dealing with, we're being parents, we're almost all of our conversations are about our daughter, which is like, she is such a focal point. And I love that one of us can recognize, maybe after a few days, maybe after a week or two, be like, hey, we haven't actually had like time for us, or we haven't had like the emotional or mental bandwidth to like talk about us and like fun stuff, or like our goals. Are we on track? Are we, like what, we're just kind of going through the motions. It's all about our kid. And like, we all know that story too well, right? And a lot of people I know can sympathize with that. But I think it's just uncomfortable. Like, it's not comfortable to say like, hey, we haven't connected, right? Hey, we haven't talked about like anything fun, just the two of us. Like, that's not, you feel like you failed, right? Like, if you have gone in this rut, whereas I can go to work and I can produce and I can get a kudos and I can make money for the family. Like, that's a very tangible, easy thing, like that dopamine hit, right? And if you're active, you can go in the gym and you can have a good sweat on, or you can get a good pump or whatever, right? And that's dopamine again, right? It's when you're in the habits of these things, they're low hanging fruit, but it's harder, I think, for a lot of folks, a lot of dudes. At least I'll speak for myself. It's harder to be intentional, and I know that it's a lot easier for me than a lot of people, because at least I talk about it, especially with my wife, and it's a work in progress always. But I think that's kind of the summary of why I think it's a little more difficult.
One of the things, Eric, I love what you said as far as like the speaking to the habits, right? And aligning that, you're on this podcast today, you've invited us, and this is the habit, right? You've brought on guests, you do the podcast regularly. So you've created this habit and you have your reasoning behind that. You have that emotional, compelling nature, right? You have that North Star. The way how you do one thing is how you do everything.
Dude, oh man, God. Yeah. I'm so glad we connected, because I just had that conversation with somebody this week.
Yeah. And so what I mean by that for the listeners is how we do one thing is how we do everything. So when we're applying these habits, right, it's the same thing in these different areas of life. And so I may be super strong in business, but I may struggle in this other area of life with my relationship. But now I'm mindful, and now I'm aware of it. So what habit can I put in place to be more intentional about that? Because how I do one thing is how I do everything. So if I know I struggle with that, well, I can drop the ego, drop the pride, and share that with her, with my spouse, right, Kendra, and have that accountability partner. And it's ultimately my job as the leader. And the way I look at it as what habit can I put in place so I can create a system or a process so I don't neglect this, right? Because we get busy. We typically align our day with what it is that we enjoy doing. And so if I don't enjoy doing this, like for me, never went to church. I never went to church for 30 plus years. Well, my wife introduced me to church. So I started plugging myself into church. Well, if you ask me, Sean, why do you go to church? Well, because like you said earlier, you are the product. You are the product that in that environment, right? And so, if you're around other Christians and people that are trying to build their marriage, and then you're typically going to do that. But if you're not doing that, you're watching Netflix 7 days a week, you're going to pick your head up in 5 years and go, "Holy cow!" There's no habits in place. You're not being intentional about it, and you're not having the conversations. So here's the beautiful thing about it. I'm the type of individual, and I know people listening to this are probably like, well, I've tried to have the conversations and I've tried to point the fingers and it just never works, right? I even hear you say
pointing the fingers definitely doesn't work, yeah.
Yeah, and that's me, right? Guilty as charged. You know what I have found? You ready for the key ingredient? Is you pray about it over and over and over again, right? Not by yourself, but also at dinner, because that person's your spouse is gonna be like, what are you doing, right? Just trust me. I'm going to pray about it. Well, when you pray it out loud, you hear it. You're in spirit. You're in frequency. So that spouse is hearing that, right? Like, who is this guy? Well, it's who do we want to become? What husband do I need to become, right, for my wife? What husband, what does a happy marriage look like? Where are the happiest couples hanging out at? And so you find those different environments. And for me, it's church, right? So me and my wife, it's a habit. Every Sunday, whether we're feeling like it or not, we go to church, and every time I'm there for just 60 minutes of my entire, week, I feel like I've leveled up 1% better for my wife. And here's the key ingredient. Here's the second key ingredient. My wife is as well. Now she's getting curious. Who do I need to become for my husband? Right? Because she's in these environments and she's not just listening to Sean, nag, right? Now she's hearing it from the pastor. Now she's hearing it from our leader at church, married life, love languages. We go on a date night every Wednesday. Well, why do we go on a date night when we don't have to? Because we don't like to spend money. We like to eat at the house. Well, we do it to get out of our environment, be intentional about it,
Yes.
put that habit in place. We get there. We know we're going to be having the conversations that we don't want to have, but it's a habit every single week, and we do it whether we feel like it or not.
Yeah, I love that, and I'll just inject. Some folks like, church 100% makes sense. Like for my community and for my again, like that's your iron sharpening iron, right? Like if it's your faith, but it's also, like you said, relationships, right? Like there's a topic that you're discussing. And for those that, I like to put this caveat in because I've been very uncomfortable around religion for a lot of my life, but like, hey, maybe that's not that format, or maybe not yet, or maybe not now, right? And there's these other aspects, again, like, hey, if you ask yourself, where are you being challenged to grow spiritually? And that, that makes people uncomfortable, but like in the greater purpose of life, in faith and what you have to believe in something. There's literally no such thing. Like atheists believe more devoutly than in anything, and that's nothing. They're so like they're the most religious thinkers, I guess, if you want to put that label on that. They're so certain about a certain thing, and I've been there, right? So I say that all to say, hey, like, please, like, just marinate on the conversation and take from it. It's getting in frequency, right? It's getting aligned with your spouse, with your significant other, or your kids, right? Or your best friend, right? Like to have the intention, because you're right. Like I'm the same way. I don't love eating out. I mean, I do and I don't, right? I enjoy it, but then I'm like, oh man, like super expensive. And now my gut's burning, all these things. But yeah, when you get out, you gotta put on adult pants, right? You can't just be wearing like your athlete. Like, I guess you could wear your athleisure everywhere these days, but no, it's like intentional. Like you're gonna put some effort in, and then you have some conversations. Hopefully, you're not the ones like on your phones when you're waiting for your food. Like you're making eye contact. You're talking about those deeper things beyond what you would in your normal day-to-day in the kitchen, where you're just in that grind, right? You're picking up your phone, someone's throwing the stove on, someone's going over here, and then you're just kind of scarfing and you're migrate over to the couch, right?
Yep.
Yeah, man, we've covered so much ground, and I do want to see, because I have to recognize that when I'm talking to you gents and a lot of people that come on the show, I get inspired, and there's certainly walks of routine and themes that you guys are putting out where you're like, man, I got to step up my thing. But I also recognize that there's a lot of people that are like, that's not relatable. Like I can't relate to these. Like when they look up your social media, they're like, dude, these two athletes, the chisel jaw dudes, and they're like, they're going to Worlds in this first time event. Of course, I can't relate to that, right? So, what would you say to those folks that they're getting started, or they're doing okay in some of these areas, and they want to just start, but that seems so far away when they're looking at examples like you guys?
Let me tell you a quick story. Sean mentioned when we met at Enterprise 14 years ago. When we met, I was 30. What was I, 20? How old were you, Sean? Were you 20?
25.
25. So I would have been 30. Right, 30, 31. We became managers there a few years in. And so we were kind of working that trail. We had our own branches, had our own employees, and we would meet for lunch at Cane's, a Caniac, fried chicken. And afterwards, we'd smoke a cigarette, right? So think about that for a second. Our belts were tight around our waists. Now, of course, this is the most ridiculous part. We would go hit the gym for like a bro session gym. Like it wasn't anything to do with fitness. Yeah, it was just complete wasted time. So it was really interesting to just see that we were there, and we talk about that often. We were there, and not look at where we are. We talk about it all the time. Like it wasn't a miracle. It wasn't genetics. It was decisions that were made slowly but surely. And if we had ourselves talking to ourselves back then, if these two guys right here could travel back in time and go catch us smoking that cigarette after the Canes and be like, guys, look at where you could be sooner. Look at what's available instead of existing right now, which is what we were doing, existing. Start living, right? So anybody that's listening to this that thinks I could never be like that, well, neither were we. We were not like that, and yet now, this is, I think, a Tony Robbins quote, but we highly overestimate what we can do in 1 year, and we completely underestimate what we can do in 5. Right. Yeah. So you have to keep that in mind, perspective. So that's what I would say. Anybody listening, you are not now. And you said earlier, Eric, like your identity. You put on running shoes and run, you're now a runner. right?
Mm-hmm.
So whatever it is that you want to put it on, and you become that thing, and it will grow.
Yeah,
So that's
and
what I
maybe
was.
you're not the world what do I say? You're not the athlete that's going to Worlds for an event yet. If you
Yeah.
want to be, like, cool, you're the person training for that. You're a fitness fanatic that's training for a big event. Like, that's you. Like, you can own that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sean, sorry, it looks like you're about to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to share with the audience, man. Like this is what's really helped me out. Like when the reason where I get my passion, my love, my energy from is just because I'm just speaking to my younger self, right? I mean, that's all I'm speaking
Yes,
to.
I think it's always that thing, right? Yeah.
It is, man. And so like I resonate so much with that question, as far as like, I was the guy eating the Cheetos, eating the pizza on the couch, watching Netflix. And don't get me wrong, I still do that to this day, but not every day, right? And I manage my time wisely with that. But for me, Eric, one of the things where I first started with, man, and anybody can do this, and I shared this early in the episode, is if you're listening to this and there's a slight like, oh, I can feel it in my body and soul, I want to make a change, I resonate so much with these guys are talking about. I've been following Eric and I just don't know where to start, right? You're not alone. That was me. The step one, the biggest piece of advice I'd get is get curious. Well, what do you mean, Sean? Well, what I mean is get curious. Right after this podcast, right after you get done with this episode, start doing some research, right? Start taking action. Most people, they procrastinate because they get stuck and they don't know who to reach out to. And start not only getting curious, but the second thing I would say is, for your listeners, I love this. It's a 3-step process to write this down is find out what it is that you want. Well, I want to work out, or I want to run a half marathon, or I want to open up a business, or I want to start a podcast. Okay. The second step is why. Why do you want to start a podcast? Why do you want to start a business? Right? And so most people can resonate with that, right? But by breaking those two things down, the second one, why, is you're tying an emotional, compelling nature behind it. So that is going to allow you to help you stay sustainable, because most people, they'll start something, but they won't finish it, right? Yeah. I'm going to start January 1st and eat healthy. No Cheetos, and I'm going to go and eat healthy. It's a recipe for disaster because there's no emotion behind it. It's not sustainable. Why are you going to continue this podcast after our interview today? Because you have a North Star, right? You have an emotional, compelling nature. And so once you find that and you can feel it in your heart and soul, then you have something on that why. The third one is, who do I need to reach out to? What steps do I need to take to get these in place on the what and the why, right? And so you can start this anywhere. You can start this 3-step process anywhere, sitting on the couch. And that's what I did. I got curious, step 1, and then I applied those 3 steps, key ingredients. What do I want after getting curious? Why do I want it? And then who do I need to reach out to? And think about it, right? I got curious on starting a podcast or starting a mastermind group. Cool. What do I want? Mastermind group. Why do I want it? Because it'll allow me to impact and serve more people, get unstuck, get unfulfilled. I mean, all this emotion tied behind it. I was like, yes, I'm going to do whatever it takes. Well, who is going to help me to get this? Called the 5 members together. Boom. Here we are today, growing, rocking and rolling, making things happen. Right. So hopefully that answers your question.
And I was going to say the hack to speed the entire thing up of becoming who you want to become. We said it earlier. Start hanging around the people who are already doing it. You will not be able to help yourself. You will automatically, there's no willpower involved. When you're hanging around people like that, it will naturally start showing up. Like, as you become who you're around, good or bad, right? So find whatever it is, like, and why, right? Because that's the sustainability portion. Because it might get tough at some point. The why keeps you going. But then when you find that who, right? Like, find many of those who's, and get with a mastermind group, right? Like, that's probably one of the best environments you could be in. And honestly, you could almost say problem solved, right? It's just a matter of how fast, in my mind.
Yeah, I love that, because we have this day and age, and I think the idea, I originally heard it years ago from Tim Ferriss, where like you can pick your mentors alive or dead. Like you can tune in and listen to these gentlemen from Texas. You can listen to this cop in Washington, and if you like things that you hear, then keep listening, right? Like, and that's where selfishly I say is I get so much from this project. Like, that I didn't start podcasting to talk to really fantastic, high performing individuals. I don't know why I didn't consider that would be an awesome byproduct. I was just like, man, like, there's a lot of people saying some good stuff. I think I got some good ideas. I want to put them out, and we're going to have these meaningful conversations and just share that to scale rather than just a few people hearing this. And some of these people have never been on podcasts. I'm like, hey, would you come on? Like, you're a sharp gal, sharp dude. You got good content, or you got good ideas, or I just want to share your story. And then I'm like, of course, like I'm receiving that too, right? But we're in this day and age where anyone can tune in and listen from these life lesson, dealers, if you want to say it that way, right? And then I will say there is something kind of irreplaceable about connecting, whether it is virtually like we are right now. It's different than me just listening to you guys talk. So that's a benefit that I get. But at the same time, like look at your personal circles. And I would venture to guess for most people, if you are listening to these higher level, like these people that are trying to help you level up, passively or actively, you will start to gravitate towards other people at work and other people and energies in your day-to-day, in your neighborhood, in your community.
Amen to that, man. Eric, I just want to say, man, you are an inspiring individual, and you've created a space, like this cool space, man, like people can just kind of step into in your personality. Like you're humble, you're thoughtful, you're wise, and it's just built a great environment, and we really appreciate you having us on, man. Like, with much respect, you're inspirational to me.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, no, thank you. And the feeling is mutual. Like I nothing against you guys, but I was up later than normal last night, and I was at work, dealing with some stuff, and it was in my mind. It was like percolating in my brain, and then I had a awesome conversation with my wife. Like, dumped a little bit of that, but then we were talking a lot about her and some of the things like she's thinking about and working on, and it just had me in this active mind, right? And so I laid down and I was like, I got the call of the guys that it's 7 over here, not crazy early. I usually get up way earlier, but like this was not the day. But the alarm goes off, and I was just like, all right, this is good. Like I felt good, although like there's a part of me that was lazy. Like I got a pretty significant lazy bone that pops up every now and then, but I loved having the reason, and I was like, okay, like no, there's probably no better way to kickstart my day than talking to these guys, and I got to be on. So it was like coffee, jump squats downstairs. So
you pulled it off, man. I would never have known, dude. You killed it.
Woke up, yeah. No, but thank you so much. Please, gents, like, and we could keep going on, and I'd love to reconnect on your show, my show. This is always so good, but please tell the listeners where they can find you, what you're working on, what to expect, all that good stuff.
Awesome. Ewan?
Yeah, all social medias. Facebook's probably our main right now. We're learning that game, that we're just bringing whatever we can just to help anyone we can. So levelupandlive.com, our mastermind group is on there. We're building more rooms out virtually. All socials, Facebook, just if you type in Level Up and Live, Instagram, TikTok.
We got that YouTube going too. So for a lot of YouTube fans out there, Level Up and Live.
Subscribe. Get on there.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, gentlemen. We'll chat soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate you.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.